Whether it's toys being shipped in from China, copper from Chile, wine from Australia, or coffee from Ethiopia, our modern economies are incredibly globalized. In the early 1960s, world trade in merchandise was less than 20% of the world economic output. Now, it's about 50%, accounting for 90% of the world's trade cargo. This was brought about in large part due to a simple but magnificently effective invention: the shipping container. Now, the busiest port in the United States, the Port of Los Angeles, handles about a quarter of the container shipments in the country, importing and exporting about 1 million containers every 6 weeks. China, on the other hand, had around 234 million containers pass through their ports in 2017. All of this globalized trade came about in large part due to one man's efforts to standardize the global shipping industry, and allowed the cost of shipping to come down from $55.58 per ton down to just 21 cents. We're going to break down how a truck driver from the Great Depression era, a treaty, and a lot of shipping containers contributed to the insane scale of shipping we see today. So pack your cargo tightly as we learn something new. As a child growing up on a farm in the small town of Maxton, North Carolina, Malcolm McLean worked long hours from early on in his childhood, especially as his father became a mail carrier to supplement the family's income. Even so, when young Malcolm graduated from high school in 1931, the country was in the midst of a Great Depression, and seeking out any further education was simply not an option. Pumping gas at a service station near his hometown, McLean saved enough money by 1934 to buy a second-hand truck for $120. This purchase set McLean on his lifelong career in the transportation industry. He soon began hauling dirt, produce, and other odds and ends for the farming community in Maxton, where reliable transportation had been hard to come by. Eventually, he began expanding his operation, purchasing 5 additional trucks and hiring a team of drivers, a move that enabled him to get off the road and look for new customers. For the next 2 years, his business thrived, but when poor economic conditions forced many of his newly won customers to withdraw their contracts, McLean scaled down his operation and got behind the wheel once again. During this setback, when he nearly lost his business, McLean came across the idea that changed his destiny. The year was 1937, and McLean was delivering cotton bales from Fayetteville, North Carolina to Hoboken, New Jersey. Arriving in Hoboken, McLean was forced to wait hours to unload his truck trailer. He saw how much time and money was being wasted, and although his observations gave him some insight into the problems at hand, it was far from the full scope of the troubles plaguing the industry. Shipping used to be a mess. A ship which might hold a few thousand tons of cargo would be loaded with everything from food to household goods, letters, vehicles, and everything was just loaded on by hand, which often made keeping track of the cargo a nightmare. The longshoremen who loaded the ships would pile the cargo onto a wooden pallet and then hoist it in a sling and transfer it over to the ship, with people waiting aboard to pack it so that it wouldn't shift when on the high seas. It was dangerous work to load these items, especially in large ports, and it wasn't uncommon for someone to die every few weeks. In 1950, New York averaged half a dozen serious incidents every day. But after dropping off that trailer load in Hoboken, McLean's observations would stick with him, though it would be 19 years before McLean converted his thought into a business proposition. For the next decade and a half, McLean concentrated on his trucking business, and by the early 1950s, with 1,776 trucks and 37 transport terminals along the eastern seaboard, he had built his operation into the largest trucking fleet in the South and the 5th largest in the country. As the trucking business matured, states adopted a new series of weight restrictions and started levying fees. Truck trailers passing through multiple states could be fined for excessively heavy loads. It became a balancing act for truckers to haul as much weight as possible without triggering any extra fees. McLean knew that there must be a more efficient way to transport cargo. He believed, quote, that ships would be a cost-effective way around shoreside weight restrictions. No tire, no chassis repair, no drivers, no fuel costs, just the trailer free of its wheels, free to be lifted unencumbered. And not just one trailer, or 2 of them, or 5, or a dozen, but hundreds on one ship. It wasn't that McLean's idea was particularly new, however. As far back as 1929, a company called Sea Train had carried railroad boxcars on its sea vessels to transport goods between New York and Cuba. In addition, It was not uncommon for ships to randomly carry large boxes on board, but no shipping business had developed a dedicated systematic process of hauling boxed cargo. Seeing the feasibility of these types of operations may have inspired McLean to take the concept to a new level. Transporting containerized cargo, as he called it, seemed to be a natural, cost-effective extension of his business. He initially envisioned his trucking fleet as an integral part of an extended transportation network. Instead of truckers traversing the eastern coastline, a few strategic trucking hubs in the south and north would function as endpoints, delivering and receiving goods at key port cities. The ship would be responsible for the majority of the travel, leaving the trucks to conduct short, mostly interstate runs, generally immune from the fees. With that concept in mind, McLean redesigned truck trailers into two parts: a truck bed on wheels and an independent box trailer, or container. He envisioned several stackable trailers in the hull of the ship. The trailers would need to be reconstructed and made of heavy steel so that they could withstand rough seas and protect their contents. They would also have to be designed without permanent wheel attachments so that they would fit neatly in stacks. At the same time, McLean acquired the Pan-Atlantic Steamship Company, which was based in Alabama and had the shipping and docking rights in prime eastern port cities, though this would, in fact, lead him into some trouble, as 7 railroads accused him of violating the Interstate Commerce Act, which stated that it was unlawful for anyone to take control or management in a common interest of 2 or more carriers without ICC approval. McLean would try and fail to get approval for running 2 major shipping companies, forcing him to choose between the trucking fleet he started or the new ocean-faring venture. He chose the latter, selling his ownership of McLean Trucking in 1955 and becoming the president of Pan-Atlantic, which he would later rename Sealand Industries. The maiden voyage for McLean's converted oil tanker, the Ideal X, carried 58 new containers from Port Newark, New Jersey to Houston in April of 1956, and many were watching the voyage very closely. The contents arrived dry and secure, but now he needed to secure clients. That wouldn't prove too difficult, however, as he could transport goods at a 25% discount off the price of conventional travel, and it eliminated several steps in the transport process. In addition, since McLean's trailers were fully enclosed and secure, they were saved from theft and damage, which were considered cost of business in the traditional shipping industry. The safety of the trailers also enabled customers to negotiate lower insurance rates for their cargo. After seeing the success of the first shipment, he managed to get port authorities to redesign their sites to accommodate the new form of shipping. The labor savings associated with McLean's business was a major victory for shippers and port authorities, but it was a huge threat to the dockside unions. You see, the traditional form of loading and unloading that we talked about earlier necessitated huge amounts of workers. By endorsing McLean's business strategy, port officials believed that they were protecting the future of their business, and they were more than okay with minimizing their workforce to do so. They reasoned that it was better to have fewer workers in a prosperous enterprise than many in a declining one. From here, standardization was rapid and widespread. As soon as the new model proved to be quicker, safer, and far cheaper, more ports adopted the infrastructure required and more companies went with containerizing their shipping. The standardization of containers also led to a huge surge in ship sizes, as the containers could be weighed beforehand and the heavier ones could be placed in the center of the ship to balance it at sea. Not to mention that the uniform sizes allowed them to be easily stacked, making it so they could more efficiently pack in the metal boxes. All of these transformations to the shipping industry were compounded by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, also known as GATT, which first took effect in 1948 and was a treaty created after World War II to help the economies of many of the countries who were hurt during the war, as well as creating a tighter-knit world economy that was less likely to break out in war again when they were dependent on each other for trade. Trade protectionism was being pushed to the wayside, and business was beginning to boom. Sealand was highly profitable throughout the 60s, and even played a key role in delivering supplies in the Vietnam War. Though in 1969, McLean would sell the company for $500 million. Though a condition of the sale of the company was that he could remain on the board of directors, he declined, saying, "I am a builder and they are runners." And so, he began to build again, raising over $1 billion for his next idea that he called econoships, which could hold over 2,000 of the 20-foot containers. His idea was to have giant ships circling the globe at the equator, with smaller ships loading and unloading the giants. But this time, it wouldn't work. People were eager to compete with him, and price wars began to break out, with each company trying to undercut the other. So in 1986, when he was 73 years old, McLean's idea resulted in one of the biggest bankruptcies in history up to that time, ending his entrepreneurial career. Though he may have been on the right track with his idea, by 1996, the largest container ship in the world could hold 5,000 containers, far more than the 2,000 McLean thought was in the realm of possibility. And today, the largest ships can hold a whopping 24,000 containers, equivalent to a freight train that's 44 miles long. It's fair to say that McLean's ideas revolutionized how we buy and sell abroad, bringing trade on an international scale closer together than ever before. If you've made it this far, I'm incredibly glad you enjoyed the video. And if you would like to help out the channel, I only ask that you like the video and subscribe so that you can be notified of more great content to come. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one.